Hello everyone. Welcome to our first knowledge clip, which is going to be how to approach your moral limits writing assignment. So essentially, we're going to just go through the assignment that is noted in your course outline, also go through each of the sections, and I'll just give some general tips on how to get started with planning and writing your paper. So of course, first things first is to establish what is the writing assignment about. So during this course, we essentially want to look at how incentives affect behavior and also how that may have moral implications. So it's important that you kind of look through the literature and look through the topics that have been discussed in the actual university course, and you can apply one of those factors or one of those topics into your research question or research paper. So we essentially want to look at how a particular market affects our behavior, and again, which kind of ethical frameworks do you want to use to rate or consider how that behavior takes place in the market of your choice. So for example, to what extent does this market or does this behavior does a particular incentive scheme, to what extent does that affect our behavior as consumers, as employees, as stakeholders, and so on. So in that way, you do have a bit of freedom in this, but also I would recommend that you go a bit more specific with your research question. This is essentially the base or the foundation, the core essence of the writing assignment. So some key things to note about this writing assignment that are definitely different from previous years is firstly, of course, that there are two assignments. So the first one is the optional one, so assignment number 1, and the second one is the actual final draft graded assignment that is due later. And that one is worth 30% of your grade. That's one thing that is a little bit different this year from previous years. The second thing is that there are less sections that you actually have to do, and that is primarily due to the lower word count requirement. So in previous years, you would have 3,000 words for writing the essay. This year, you have 2,000 words. So you do see that rather than having an introduction, theoretical background, analysis, and conclusion, we now have cut out the analysis part and have gone straight from the theoretical background into the conclusion. So you'll see that in my word count recommendations, that's where I've kind of allocated a little bit more to the conclusion section and kept a similar word count as previous years for the theoretical background to make sure that you really establish that relevance there, but we'll get into it in just a second. One other big thing that is definitely different this year from previous years is the implementation of AI. So of course, using AI as a sort of secondary source to help you create clear outlines, help you create a logical progression between your arguments, and so on. One thing that is really important to note is, of course, that you are not allowed to copy and paste AI output directly into your paper. So be careful about this. You can lose 4 points on your assignment if you do this, and also if you do not note your AI chatbot and logbook into your appendix. So please make sure to be careful about this and use AI more as a tool rather than something that is writing your whole paper for you. So be careful about this and use it more as a secondary resource in tandem with actual literary and academic articles that have a solid basis in research. So that is also something that is a bit different this year. So getting into now the actual assignment. So of course, assignment 1 is essentially your outline. So it's the optional one. I would really recommend doing this assignment because of course, you're going to get feedback from the person who is actually going to end up grading your 30% of your grade assignment. So why not make an outline now? Why not already start exploring your research question now? It doesn't take too much time. And again, you're going to get some good feedback from your tutorial teacher on if you're going in the right direction, if you need to be a bit more specific, a bit more broad, and so on. So the outline itself is to, of course, start just looking into the literature, explaining also why it's necessary to study this topic. So dabbling a little bit into the introduction, and just creating an overall planning for your research question and what exactly do you want to ask in your research question. So that is something that is really nice to get started with just as an initial thing. You still have a couple of days until the deadline. And honestly, this outline doesn't need to take you more than 2-3 hours max. So I would definitely recommend doing it so you can get that valuable feedback from your teacher. Then, of course, moving on to the graded part or the graded assignment, let's start with the introduction, which I would recommend word count wise is around 200 to 400 words. So in general, your introduction is all about just establishing the context, establishing what is the problem, and what is your research question, basically asking what are you looking into, also how you are going to evaluate your research question, and just the overall structure of your paper. So that's essentially what the introduction is about. That's why it's a little bit shorter in word count than the other parts that are a little bit more analytical. So I would recommend this word count. And as you can see in this video, I do have some things in italics. Anything that is in italics is my own notes or own suggestions, while the things that are not in italics are from the course outline that I've just kind of written down a little bit more in a clearer way, or a bit more in a organized or spaced out way. So that's the introduction. Feel free to pause at any moment if you would like to just look at what notes I've written for the italic parts. But yeah, moving on from the introduction, as I mentioned, this is sort of just a preface, context, setting the background into your theoretical background, which is actually the big chunk of your paper. So in this part, this is actually where you are defining key terms. So defining noxious market, defining ethical pluralism, and then also this is where you are defining and establishing what criteria are you using to grade your research question. So how are you going to actually evaluate your research question using particular criteria? That's something that you can do in your theoretical background and use those based on the literature. How are you going to evaluate your research question and the extent to which it is valid or not valid? So this is where you define those key concepts, use the literature that has been discussed in class and beyond, I would really recommend. And this is also dabbling a little bit into the analysis because you do want to reference back regularly to your research question here in the theoretical background. And then lastly, skipping over the proper analysis section, you have your conclusion and questions for further research. As I mentioned before, it's more word counts that I would typically give for a conclusion, simply because you want to relate, again, your literature and your findings back to your research question. And I think it needs to be a little bit more developed here since you don't have a proper analysis section to do so. In your conclusion section, of course, you want to establish, again, what is the research question of your paper. Note how you have answered that research question using your key definitions and using your criteria on how you've evaluated the research question. Also, of course, limitations, big thing. So what are some limitations in your research? And also based on your findings and your takeaways from the literature, how would you then suggest someone proceeds with your suggestions and your thoughts into a following paper or expanding on this paper in some way? So those are the big parts of the conclusion. And again, it's a little bit of a mix of the analysis, just like how the theoretical background is, because you do want to, again, connect these criteria and arguments back into your central question that you are trying to answer in your paper. So that would be my recommendation for the conclusion section. And then, of course, you have your logbook, but that's kind of just the appendix, so not super crazy relevant at the moment. But again, keep track of all of your AI queries and questions, and again, use AI as a tool for kind of your general outline, use it to kind of also sort out your thoughts and ideas. It's also a really great tool for that as well. Going into a little bit of the requirements, as I mentioned, 2,000 words, so it needs to be very concise, very purposeful in terms of what you include, what you do not include relating to your research question. At least six academic sources. If you use at least a couple of the ones that have been given to you in the course, you easily have around 4 academic sources from that alone. But again, look into the literature. You will not have enough backing for a lot of your definitions and a lot of your criteria if you have only 6 academic sources. It's just simply too little. So really look into that, and I would definitely recommend doing that as soon as possible so you can kind of gather it and organize it. APA style references, that just make sure that you know how to do this. And again, include the chat history unless you want to get a markdown of 4 points, which is super crazy. And then, of course, just my final recommendations regarding the paper is just simply to start now. So again, I highly, highly recommend that you do the first assignment that is optional. Just start with your literature search, isolate key terms that you want to focus on, or key components, key factors, key market behaviors that you would like to focus on, and look into that a bit more into Google Scholar to find more academic sources, find some news articles, find something that establishes the relevance of your research question in real life. Again, listen to your tutorial group teacher, kind of goes hand in hand with doing the first assignment, but listen to what they have to say and what they suggest. That way you can kind of cater your writing assignment also in terms of their own preferences. So of course you can, get that good grade. And then lastly is it's just already very important to get into the zone of academic writing. So make sure that even in your rough drafts, you are avoiding personal pronouns, personification of non-living items, informal language, and also make sure that you are already noting down your citations and doing your in-text citations correctly. So I would really, really stress this as well, already getting started with this so that you can avoid having to do this extra work later on when you are probably getting a bit more stressed for your actual exam that is worth 70% of the grade. So get started with these things now, and I definitely can assume that if you do these things, then you're going to be able to ace the paper. So hopefully this was helpful. We're going to explore these things a little bit more in depth in the knowledge clips to follow, but yeah, hopefully this was a nice introduction to how to approach the paper.